What does President Barack Obama's call for a national dialogue on race mean in Arizona?
One of the positive things that I always remind myself of is that we have had the courage in this country to confront these issues as a society.
I think we need to ensure that our elected officials and other folks in power positions are held responsible. And we have to talk about some of these problems.
A conversation about race, ethnicity, and tolerance from 4 unique perspectives. It's Arizona Week.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support. Once again, your moderator, Michael Chihak.
In the wake of the Trayvon Martin case in Florida, we again face questions of prejudice in society. We've invited 4 people with varying perspectives to explore how Arizonans can approach the issues. We'll start with excerpts from Arizona Public Media's 2011 documentary, Barrios and Barriers, a look at how things were in a less tolerant time.
The integration of schools didn't necessarily make it better or easier for students of color or for their parents. In 1952, something as simple as the name of a school proved to be an issue.
They had to change the name from Dunbar to John Spring, who was one of the first white teachers here from, I believe, from Switzerland. The Mexican and the white families living in the district didn't want their kids to graduate from a school named after Dunbar, who was a famous black poet.
It was a mixed environment, but we had separate home rooms so that you had a separation of students.
My father had a rule at the house that we were to speak Spanish in the house, and as soon as we walked out of the house, we were to speak English. One day a man asked me, "Why do you call yourself a Mexican American?" And I said, I never did. You called me a Mexican American.
Once the veil, had been removed from our eyes, then we could analyze and understand and critique the society for what it was.
A defining event from this era centered around the El Rio golf course in the Barrios on Tucson's west side.
The moment that we literally walked into the golf course and took it over. I think for many of us, that was a moment of not only personal, but community liberation.
All of the so-called nice places in Tucson, all those were segregated. No blacks, very, very few Mexican Americans, if any. No Native Americans, and to many of the places, no Jewish people.
My father wanted to buy property on Tucson Boulevard and Speedway, 1945. And they said no. No Chinese is allowed to buy on Speedway.
How far from those past realities have we moved? Here to discuss it with me, Charles Ford Jr., the only African American to serve on the Tucson City Council. He was elected to 2 terms in 1979 and 1983 and served a term as vice mayor. Dr. Ford is a retired elementary school principal in Tucson. Kelly Fryer, executive director of the YWCA Tucson, which has as its motto, Eliminating Racism, Empowering Women. Ms. Fryer is former executive director of Arizona List, which supports pro-choice women seeking political office. She was a pastor and taught at Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota in leadership. Jeff Lavender, volunteer chairman of the Arizona Civil Rights Advisory Board, appointed by the governor. The board aims to eliminate discrimination in the state's diverse population. Mr. Lavender is from Casa Grande, where he is principal of Valago Middle School. And Raquel Rubio-Goldsmith, a professor of Mexican American Studies at the University of Arizona, specializing in Mexican American history, women's history and rights, and immigration issues. Professor Rubio-Goldsmith was born and reared on the Mexican border in Douglas. Welcome to all of you, and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks. To set the agenda for our discussion, we'll start with what President Obama said last week about the African American experience.
when you think about why, in the African American community at least, there's a lot of pain around what happened here. I think it's important to recognize that the African American community is looking at this issue through a set of experiences and a history that that doesn't go away.
Dr. Ford, let's begin with you. Is your experience in line with what President Obama described for African Americans?
Yes, very much so. As an African American, it's a struggle, and has been a struggle, and continue to be a struggle. You look at some of the historical type of things that have happened. You look at the situation, the time that many African Americans have put away in prison. You look at the 60% of African Americans who are in prison also. And so you find that there's certainly some problems, some major problems in terms of the African American as he or she relates in this society. So it's my position that if we're going to change things, where the African American become a real part of the society, then there are many things that must be changed. For instance, I think one of the things that have really bothered me is a young African American woman whose husband had beat her, and so what she did, he came over perhaps to beat her again. She took a pistol, shot in the air, not at him, shot in the air, and she ended up with 20 years in prison. I mean, something is wrong with this picture. And of course, in the case down in Florida there, something very definitely wrong here. And, you know, stand your ground, I think is the name of that. And for a young boy that's killed, actually, and the trials found out that nothing was done wrong. The shooter was gone free. Something's very wrong with this picture. And you think that in 2013, with the struggle that we've gone through, that things should have gone beyond that type of situation. So, go ahead.
Mr. Lavender, in your experience with the Civil Rights Commission in the year 2013, are we still hearing about those kinds of things here in Arizona, those kinds of complaints?
You know, I think we're seeing a shifting. It's certainly there, and I think we've made progress, but we haven't made a lot of progress. What our commission has dealt with more recently is profiling and racial profiling of Latinos, African Americans, and then we've been doing some work on 1070 school bullying issues, and so these issues are there. A lot of them are under the surface, and I think a lot is we think because of the progress of African Americans. I share with students all the time that I come from the generation of first. We celebrate first, Dr. Ford being the first Phoenix, Tucson City Council member. When President Obama was elected president, it's kind of hard to trump that. And so now we've got to work more of what does it mean to be an African American, and understanding, as the president talked about, through lenses.
Professor Rubio-Goldsmith, in regard to racial profiling, that has been an issue here in Arizona because of SB 1070 and other measures aimed at illegal immigration. Do you see that as a continuing problem in the state?
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I think that for a while, because of the civil rights movement and the success it had on a number of areas, racial profiling was really looked down upon. You know, enforcement agencies, law enforcement were trained. This was a constant problem, but it was something that was on the radar, so to speak. And to me, one of the issues is that things that had been on the radar are now not acceptable anymore. We're not supposed to talk about racial profiling, or we're not supposed to talk about racism. They say it's over because we have President Obama. And the truth of the matter, the way that I see it in terms of being of Mexican descent, is that I think that Mexicans have become a race. Historically, we've been a race. That's, you know, in other parts of the world, if you go to France or Germany or China, a Mexican is a nationality. But in the United States, Mexican is a race. It's because a skin color. We have this issue with skin color, and it is so embedded in our law. All the systems of law are embedded with what is called a white perspective. And so that we have then these travesties, these horrible violations, because a law is made to look at it solely within a white perspective, as if race did not exist. But the reality is that racism and discrimination based on race, racial profiling, does exist.
And it goes way beyond that, does it
Yeah.
not, Ms. Fryer? It's race, it's also gender, sexual orientation, religious discrimination. What experiences have you come across with the YWCA, which again pushes out there to eliminate racism and empower women?
Well, you know, as a new executive director of the YWCA, I've inherited this great legacy. You know, the YW has been really on the forefront of all these issues for 150 years, and here in Tucson for almost 100. And my immediate predecessor, Janet Marcotte, was you know, in that seat for 25 years and really became an important voice in the area of justice for all people in Tucson, and continues to be. So you know, I've inherited that legacy at the YW here in Tucson. You know, it's hard not to look at the gaps that exist. You know, the wealth gap, the education gap, the employment gap that exists between people of color, that exists between men and women, and not have to conclude that there's something going on here that's really institutionalized. You know, to your point, it's institutionalized. So when you have, for example, you look at the United States Congress, and you see 19% of our congressional representatives are women. When women make up half the population, there's a problem there. There's one African American governor in the country, and only the second elected since Reconstruction. There, across the country, if you look at state and local offices, national offices, 3% of our elected officials in this country are Hispanic. You know, you can't look at a gap like that and say that it's just, you know, you can't blame the victim. There are some issues happening here institutionally that we need to address.
Mr. Lavender, do you think that political polarization as we see it, liberal versus conservative, and it's very polarized both here in Arizona and nationally these days, do you think that contributes to any intolerance when it comes to race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation?
Absolutely. You know, to run on the right side right now, you have to speak out against immigration, and you know, immigration is a lot of issues. But as you address immigration, you're also impacting the lives of people that are here legally, and so those kind of comments have effects on society as a whole and the entire Latino population. But certainly, politics and that great divide has an impact.
Let's talk about some positives. Are there positives, Dr. Ford? What are we seeing that we can take hope from and move forward on?
Well, I think one of the things is looking at the President of the United States. For the first time, we have an African American who is president. There are others who are in a good position, very strong positions. And I think these are very positive things. But we cannot sit and say, well, everything has worked out and that everything's positive now, but there are still some problems that we're going to have to deal with. And they're going to have to be dealt with at all levels, at the state, at the national, at the local levels, in order to ensure that all of our people have opportunities to succeed and to be successful.
We need to move on to our next part of this discussion. So what we want to ask is what's to be done with the experiences and impressions that we've heard. Let's go back to President Obama's remarks of last week, in which he called for a conversation about these issues.
I think it's going to be important for all of us to do some soul searching. You know, there's been talk about should we convene a conversation on race. I haven't seen that be particularly productive when, you know, politicians try to organize conversations. They end up being stilted and politicized, and folks are locked into the positions they already have. On the other hand, in families and churches and workplaces, there's the possibility that people are a little bit more honest, and at least you ask yourself your own questions about, am I wringing as much bias out of myself as I can? Am I judging people as much as I can based on not the color of their skin, but the content of their character?
The president quoting there at the end from Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, which, by the way, was 50 years ago next month. Professor Rubio-Goldsmith, are we still pursuing that dream? Where are we in the pursuit of that dream?
I think we're pursuing, and we have to continue to pursue. One of the positive things that I always remind myself of is that we have had the courage in this country to confront these issues as a society. Not perfectly, with a lot of imperfections, but the fact that we're sitting here today talking about it is an example of how we're committed. But I also think we have to go beyond talk. I think there has to be action. We need to start with talking. We need to understand each other a little better. But we have a lot of compensating to do, and that becomes a problem. You know, a lot of people are against affirmative action, for example. But without affirmative action, I wouldn't be sitting at this table. I don't know about others, you know. And it has made a difference, and we still have compensating to do in that sense. We can't abandon that type of action.
Ms. Fryer, in that regard, what can we do to keep it moving forward, not only in conversation, but in action?
Yeah, you know, I just actually, if it's okay, I would just like to respond. I don't know if you saw Justice Bader Ginsburg's remarks today about the Voting Rights Act, and she said, you know, in her dissent, this is in place because it works. And she warned in her dissent that there would be laws that were immediately pushed forward to prevent people from voting, and she gave a series of examples of how that's happened, including here in Arizona, the movement that's happening right now in our state capital. I couldn't agree more.
Dr. Ford, what do we need to add to the conversation and to the action to continue to move things forward and make progress?
I think we need to ensure that our elected officials and other folks in power positions are held responsible. And we have to talk about some of these problems. We have to have a scheme, a plan, and how we're going to move these things ahead. I think what has happened, we have moved a certain amount over the years, but we've sort of kind of backed away from our responsibility in terms of ensuring that every person, regardless of color, regardless of language, have a same opportunity to succeed as everyone else in society. And so this has to be a real push on the part. For instance, there are those in Congress who are against each other because one's Republican, the other's a Democrat, all this type of stuff, which lose sight on where we're going and how we're pushing ahead to ensure that we are providing opportunities for all of our people. And I know as an African American and a city council member, I must also assume a responsibility for Hispanics, for Anglos, for ensure that all of our kids, particularly as a school principal too, that they have opportunities and that we ensure that we're doing the right things that they can grow and go beyond where they initially are.
Let's talk about that educational level, which is where ideas and concepts and perhaps traditions get seeded. Mr. Lavender, as the principal of a middle school, what are you seeing in the way children are developing these days? A much more diverse society in the younger generation, certainly. Are you seeing more progressive thought in that regard?
Certainly I'm seeing more progressive thought in students, and I believe the students of today are much more accommodating and understanding the differences in that. You know, when you go into a kindergarten classroom, you'll normally see students of all races talking together, and then by the time they're seniors in high school, you see much more segregated campuses. And so over time, students are learning some of these things. So it's our job as educators to develop relationships, because I believe it all starts with relationships and having a strong relationships throughout the campus. And it's the school's responsibility to develop those relationships, but those relationships also have to go out into the community. So the community, and it's becoming much more difficult to have relationships now because so much more communication is done via texting, Twitter, and those types of things, rather than one-on-one conversations. And when you're texting or sending out a message, you can say whatever you want because the other person's not standing in front of you. And so we spend a great deal of time on our school dealing with what's being said on Facebook and holding people accountable.
Ms. Fryer?
You know, on the other hand, part of what has made the world so small is all of that online technology. You know, we know what's happening in Egypt the minute that it happens. And so I think, you know, in my view, the opposite problem exists, that it's easy to get complacent. I was in Grant Park the night of the election in downtown Chicago, shoulder to shoulder with 1 million other people, all of us crying, you know, all different races, ethnicities, ages. And I think maybe some of us took it for granted that we were further along than we really are. You know, it's time to have a serious conversation and to take action to make sure that these things get changed.
Well, Professor Rubio-Goldsmith, you in fact made a comment earlier about that. You said, well, we have an African-American president now, so we've arrived, right? But
we
wish, but there are just all the imperfections underneath that, right? And I'm thinking right now, I see such hope in the young people. I look at the dreamers. Do you realize what those young people who cross the border, I know a lot of people are saying about the illegality, but they are confronting exactly the discussion that is not being held on immigration. The young people at TUSD in demanding that they want good education. We may not agree with everything they say, but here we have people involved wanting to make a better world and trying to point the way. And I think that President Obama has been a big inspiration for that in many ways.
Dr. Ford, President Obama, I might point out, is the first president who's younger than I am in my lifetime. And that in and of itself, I suppose, is inspirational to know that there's younger leaders coming up. But what else is contributed there in that aura that young people of all colors, all races, all ethnicities can grasp?
Well, I think the schools have done a tremendous job in that situation of bringing folks together, and I think kids together in particular, and then and also pushing, like I'm sure that President Obama was pushed over the years in terms of you can do this, you can do that, and you can do it better. And so, and I think that must be also. But one of the things that I'm very concerned about, as I watch what's happening in education now, I find that you have a lot of schools that are opening up, maybe over here or way over here, that many of the minority kids don't have access to. And so are we moving? And as a young man growing up in Louisiana, I went always through schools, segregated schools. So I think that we have to ensure that the schools will accommodate all of our kids, take all of our kids in. And particularly when many of the schools that are semi-private schools, I call them that, if many of the schools are receiving money from the state, they're public funds they're receiving. So you have the public schools over here. You have those schools that are receiving funds that are not particular public schools. So we have to ensure that all of our kids have opportunities, all the children have opportunity for a quality education, and to push them and to ensure that they feel very positive about themselves so that they maybe one day will consider becoming president of the United States.
Mr. Lavender, I don't think anybody would disagree that education is the key to all of it. But specifically from your point of view as a middle school principal, what do you see happening in a positive way among students in terms of their conversations? You said that by the time they're seniors, they're segregated again after starting out as a heterogeneous group. What's going on at the middle school level these days?
There's a lot of positive things going on. Students are much more involved in their education than when I first became an educator, as I was there and setting goals. And so those are positive things. The DREAM Act, the Dreamers, and so you have a lot of students, and through the last couple of years, I've had students that, because of President Obama and the inspiration, have told me they want to be president, they want to be Supreme Court justices and things like that. But I think Dr. Ford's absolutely right about equality in education. The charter school systems in Arizona, they do not have to play by the same rules as public schools, and that could be a whole nother show. But we've seen in Casa Grande where our Anglo population has gone from 38% to 26% when charter schools came to town, because charter schools are not as accessible. They do not have to take every student. And so they're creating segregated, not fully segregated schools like we would ever think we saw in the 50s. But we're certainly heading into that where there is less diversity in the schools because of the charters and not having to play by the same rules as public schools.
So part of the conversation has to be, what do we do to fix the educational system or to improve the educational system so that it maintains that kind of diversity that we need in our society? How do you react to that, Ms. Fryer?
I would agree that, you know, we need to be looking at each system. You know, I would say maybe at the heart of all of this is an economic system that is really stacked against low-income folks. And, you know, when you look at things like 40% of the single moms in Arizona are living in poverty, somewhere between 27-30% of all kids in Arizona are living in poverty. You have to start asking what's wrong with an economic system that in the last, since 1980, the wealth gap between whites and blacks has tripled. There's some things wrong with our economic system that need to be fixed as well.
That'll have to be the last word because we're out of time. I want to thank you all for being here. Raquel Rubio-Goldsmith, professor from the University of Arizona. Kelly Fryer, executive director of the YWCA of Tucson. Dr. Charles Ford, retired educator and former city councilman in Tucson. And Jeff Lavender, principal of a middle school in Casa Grande. Go to our website, azpm.org, for links to the organizations that our guests represent. That's our program for Friday, July 26, 2013. For Arizona Week, I'm Michael Chihak.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support.